Rebacca Lobo this past Sunday, Indiana Fever vs. Dallas Wings on ESPN. When it comes to announcers speaking out, this might have been the most outspoken announcers have been when it comes to the egregious officiating, but more importantly, the non-calls. When Caitlin Clark is getting grabbed, getting held, getting yanked, getting hugged, getting hacked. Rebacca Lobo said, okay, Sunday, July 13th, I'm going to make sure it's my mission that when I start calling this game, I start calling a spade and holding these referees to the fire. Nothing's going to change.
What happens when even the most respected voices in basketball can't stay quiet anymore? That's exactly what happened when Rebacca Lobo, a WNBA legend and announcer, went off during a live broadcast, calling out the horrific officiating in a game between the Indiana Fever and Dallas Wings. The target of her frustration, Caitlin Clark, the WNBA's brightest star, who's been repeatedly fouled without so much as a whistle.
The new fans need to speak up. The announcers who aren't scared need to speak up. I'm sure a lot of those old announcers are scared. I'm sure they're scared. But the announcers like Rebacca Lobo, Orion Rucco, they need to step up and say, oh, the officiating that's going on here isn't okay.
Lobo didn't hold back, calling out referees for their blatant disregard of the rules, and it's clear the silence around the league's officiating crisis is finally being shattered. In this video, we'll dive into the shocking moment that sparked it all and why it's raising serious questions about the WNBA's future. Are referees failing the league's stars? And if so, what's at stake for the players and the league itself? Stick around to find out. It's not often you see a seasoned WNBA announcer like Rebacca Lobo completely break from the script. But that's exactly what happened during the July 13th game between the Indiana Fever and the Dallas Wings. As the game went on, Lobo's frustration with the officiating became impossible to ignore. When Caitlin Clark, one of the league's brightest stars, was blatantly grabbed, held, and yanked in the middle of a play without so much as a foul call,
Quinterly grabbed Caitlin Clark's arm, like, Caitlin, where you going? Get over here. Oh, that's interesting. Why play defense when we can just grab somebody's arm, right? Interesting. Quinterly putting her hands around Caitlin Clark's waist. Valentine's Day was a few months ago. Sorry. Lobo
hit her breaking point. The middle of calling the game, Lobo didn't just let it slide. She made it clear that she was going to speak up. Calling a spade, she declared, this was more than just a casual observation. Lobo, a former player with years of experience, understood exactly what was happening on the court. She recognized the gravity of what was going on and made sure the viewers at home did. 2. The frustration wasn't just about one or two missed calls. It was about the clear pattern of consistent physical play going unpunished.
Ball handler, there's a grab, there's a hold, there's another grab. I mean, all of those the ball.
There's a grab, there's a hold.
Caitlin Clark, who's been a force in the WNBA since her debut, was getting roughed up in nearly every possession, whether it was being grabbed by the arm or having her waist held by defenders. Clark was getting the kind of physical treatment you would expect in a game of football, not basketball, and yet not a single foul was called. Rebacca Lobo wasn't alone in her shock. Fellow announcer Orion Rowe shared her disbelief as they both watched, helpless, as Clark was denied basic protection from the referees. The moment was surreal. Ex-player and commentator calling out the very system that the WNBA has long been silent about. In fact, Lobo's outburst was incredibly rare. For years, the league has been tight-lipped about officiating flaws, often choosing to maintain the status quo. But in this moment, Lobo made it clear that enough was enough. She went as far as to say that the only way for anything to change is if the conversation gets loud enough. Nothing's going to change unless the public conversation ramps up and gets too loud, Lobo said, and she was right. The issue wasn't just the game at hand, it was part of a much larger problem. Fans and players alike have been pointing out these officiating issues for years. But it wasn't until Lobo spoke out that the conversation seemed to gain serious traction. What's particularly striking about this moment is the context. We've seen countless incidents where fouls go uncalled or star players get roughed up. But to hear it from someone who's been in the trenches and understands what it's like to be in those situations was a game changer. Lobo wasn't just calling out bad calls, she was calling out a system that has repeatedly failed to protect its stars. And while this was a breakthrough moment for Lobo, it raised an important question. Why has it taken so long for this to happen? Why have announcers, coaches, and players allowed this to continue for so long without addressing it? The fact that a respected voice like Lobo was forced to speak up so boldly speaks volumes about the depth of the problem. Caitlin Clark's situation isn't unique. This isn't the first time. A WNBA star has been left to fend for themselves on the court without proper protection from referees. But the blatant disregard for Clark's safety has been on full display, game after game, and it's becoming impossible to ignore. The repeated non-calls have reached a tipping point, and the question has to be asked, when did it become acceptable to let a star like Clark take constant hits without consequence? Let's break it down. In the game that sparked Rebacca Lobo's outburst, Clark was physically assaulted on multiple occasions, and yet the referees did absolutely nothing about it. The first example that caught Lobo's attention was when a defender quinerly grabbed Caitlin's arm mid-play. It was a textbook foul, no question about it, yet the referees turned a blind eye. And it didn't stop there. In another instance, Quinerly had her arm wrapped around Clark's waist as she tried to push through a screen. It wasn't even subtle. It was as if defenders had decided the rules didn't apply to them when facing Clark. But the abuse didn't end with just arm grabs and holds. Clark's landing zone, a critical area for any player, especially a shooter like her, was also repeatedly violated. In one particularly dangerous play, Tiara McCowan, another strong player, landed directly in Clark's space as she was attempting a three-point shot. Clark fell to the ground, and it was clear she had landed awkwardly. It's not just about the fact that McCowan was in her space, it's about the fact that the referees did nothing. There should have been a foul. It was dangerous, unnecessary, and completely against the rules. Yet Clark was forced to pick herself up and keep going without so much as a whistle. In this case, what was most shocking wasn't just the physical treatment Clark endured, it was the utter lack of response from the referees. Imagine being a player and feeling like every time you're on the floor, you're just one missed call away from a serious injury. That's the reality Clark has had to face night after night, and the WNBA. They're complicit by staying silent. When referees allow this kind of treatment to go unpunished, it sends a message. This behavior is acceptable. And that's not just dangerous, it's damaging. It's not just Clark who's at risk. Other players see the way stars are treated and begin to think that the only way to succeed is to play outside the rules. If physical play like this is allowed to happen without consequences, it sets a terrible precedent for future generations of players. In an ideal world, referees would step in, call the fouls, and protect players like Clark, who are crucial to the WNBA's success. But here we are, watching as the league's brightest star is repeatedly thrown around the court without any protection. The problem is clear: without proper accountability, the WNBA risks losing its top players to injury, frustration, and eventually disillusionment with the league altogether. Fans see it, players feel it, and now, thanks to Rebacca Lobo, the spotlight is shining on it. But it begs the question, will the league finally act? Or will it continue to allow its stars to be treated as expendable? What happens when the officiating in a professional sports league becomes so inconsistent that it threatens the safety of its players? In the case of the WNBA, we're seeing just how dangerous this can be, especially when referees repeatedly fail to protect their stars. The lack of proper officiating not only impacts the flow of the game, but it also jeopardizes the physical well-being of the players. And when it's someone like Caitlin Clark, the face of the WNBA, it becomes impossible to ignore the long-term consequences. Every time Caitlin Clark hits the court, she's essentially playing with a target on her back. Her skill set makes her one of the most dangerous players in the league, and naturally, she draws a lot of defensive attention. But when the defense goes beyond the boundaries of fair play, holding, grabbing, and illegally impeding her, something has to give. And yet, the referees are doing nothing to stop it. The issue here is not just the missed calls on individual plays, it's the systemic failure to protect players from dangerous play. For Clark, this means being yanked and pulled at every turn, without any consequence for her opponents. For players like her, who rely on their ability to move quickly and create space on the court, this is not only frustrating, it's unsafe. The fact that referees continually fail to call these obvious fouls not only places Clark at risk for injury, but it sends a damaging message to the rest of the league. This is acceptable behavior. In any other professional league, this level of negligence would be considered an epidemic. But in the WNBA, the silence from both the referees and league officials is deafening. When Clark's landing zone was violated by Tiara McCowan, it wasn't just a bad call, it was a dangerous play. Allowing players to crowd a shooter's landing zone puts them at serious risk of knee, ankle, or foot injuries that can take months to recover from. Yet there was no foul called, no acknowledgement that McCowan's actions were against the rules, and no intervention from the officials. This is not just about one or two bad calls. This is about a repeated pattern of ignoring the rules when it comes to the league's top players. In any sport, when players start to feel like their safety isn't a priority, they begin to lose confidence in the system. For a player like Clark, who is critical to the WNBA's growth and visibility, this failure could have devastating consequences. What happens when stars like Clark, who are marketed as the face of the league, get injured due to this reckless officiating? The league faces a crisis. Rebacca Lobo's call for accountability was exactly what was needed, but it goes beyond simply calling out bad officiating in one game. It's about addressing a culture where referees feel comfortable letting the physical play slide, even when it clearly puts players in harm's way. The WNBA has a responsibility to its athletes, its fans, and its future to ensure that its stars are protected before it's too late. At this point, it's clear the officiating is more than just bad, it's dangerous, and the longer the league waits to act, the more likely we are to see another top player sidelined due to preventable injuries. There's a disturbing reality in the WNBA that's become increasingly hard to ignore. The league's physicality has evolved into a system that punishes its stars instead of protecting them. Caitlin Clark's experience on the court is emblematic of a broader issue within the WNBA's structure where referees routinely turn a blind eye to illegal physical play, forcing players to either adapt to this broken system or suffer. But this isn't just about the referees, it's about the league itself, which has failed to address the growing problem. This system is actively breaking its stars. One of the most shocking revelations came from Paige Bueckers, who, in an interview, admitted that her defensive approach had changed significantly since entering the WNBA. "I had to learn how to foul," Bueckers said, explaining that the physicality in the league forces players to break the rules just to keep up. This is a disturbing admission, because it highlights a critical flaw in the WNBA's defensive structure. The league isn't teaching its players to compete within the rules. It's teaching them that they need to play outside of them to succeed. For someone like Bueckers, a player who was renowned in college for her ability to play clean defense, this is a major adjustment. She was accustomed to the freedom of movement that college basketball often provides, where defenders are encouraged to use their feet and positioning to stop the ball. But in the WNBA, that's simply not enough. The league's level of physicality is so high that players like Bueckers, who would never have dreamed of committing blatant fouls in college, are now forced to adjust. It's no longer about stopping your opponent through skill and positioning. It's about getting away with as much contact as possible without being caught. This isn't an isolated case. Across the league, players are starting to realize that in order to survive on the court, they have to start playing dirty. In many ways, the WNBA is actively encouraging a style of play where fouling is normalized, and the rules seem to be an afterthought. This isn't just a problem for players like Bueckers. It's a problem for the entire league. And it's not just about what the players have to do on the court. It's also about the message it sends to fans and future generations of players. The WNBA has built a system where the stars are forced to play outside the rules just to keep up, and in doing so, it risks damaging the integrity of the game. If the league continues to allow this level of physical play, it won't be long before fans start to question whether the game they're watching is even basketball anymore. The real question is whether the league will continue to tolerate this broken system, where players are left to fend for themselves without protection from the referees. If the WNBA continues to ignore this issue, it's not just the players who will suffer, it's the entire league. The stars who make the game watchable and engaging will eventually be broken by a system that values physicality over fairness. And if that happens, the WNBA risks losing the very players who are the heart and soul of the league. This isn't just a problem for Caitlin Clark or Paige Bueckers, it's a problem for the future of the WNBA itself. As the Indiana Fever's head coach, Stephanie White is at the heart of this dilemma. Caught between teaching her players to play by the rules and adapting to a system where foul play seems to be the norm, White, who has always emphasized playing defense cleanly, now faces an uncomfortable question. Should she teach her team to abandon principles of clean basketball and embrace the physicality that the rest of the league seems to get away with? In many ways, the Fever are a model for how basketball should be played. They focus on shuffling their feet, cutting off angles, and playing active defense without relying on fouls. Whether it's Caitlin Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, or Lexi Hull, these players are taught to defend by positioning and intelligence, not by grabbing, holding, or shoving. But in the current climate of the WNBA, this clean play is becoming a disadvantage. For White, this puts her in a tough spot. The Fever are clearly at a disadvantage when they're not allowed to compete at the same physical level as their opponents. If a team like the Indiana Fever continues to play basketball the right way, they risk getting beaten up by teams that play dirty without consequence. And in a league where star players like Caitlin Clark are getting bullied with no calls, it's hard to imagine how the Fever can stay competitive. White must be asking herself, should we keep playing this way and hope the referees start calling fouls? Or should we change our approach and teach our players to play like the rest of the league? This is a question every coach in the WNBA is grappling with right now. Do they stick to clean, disciplined basketball, or do they risk losing to teams that can get away with rough play? This is also a crucial moment for the Fever as a franchise. If White continues to stress playing without fouls, it could make the team stand out as the clean squad, but it could also hurt them in the standings. On the other hand, teaching her players to get physical might help the Fever compete, but it would compromise the integrity of their game. Ultimately, the decision may not even be in White's hands. The league's officiating practices are setting the tone for how teams must play, and unless the WNBA addresses these issues, coaches like White will be forced to adapt to a broken system just to keep up. The question is, how long can the Fever, and teams like them, keep playing clean before they're left behind? When it comes to player rankings and recognition, there's a significant discrepancy that can't be ignored. The media's portrayal of stars like Caitlin Clark often doesn't align with the fan voting or the actual on-court performance. This inconsistency was glaringly highlighted in the ESPN All-Star rankings and the general public perception of players like Clark and Aaliyah Boston. The discrepancy in rankings and media bias is becoming a larger issue, with fan support not always matching up with what the media is pushing. For instance, Caitlin Clark is widely recognized for her exceptional performance, yet her placement in ESPN's top rankings wasn't exactly a clear reflection of her impact. While she's arguably been one of the most dominant players in the league, her ranking in the All-Star voting didn't line up with her influence on the court. This misalignment isn't a coincidence. It suggests that certain media figures and influencers are actively pushing narratives that don't always reflect the reality of what's happening on the court. This is where the problem begins to fester. Fans are being led to believe one thing, while the true performance of players like Clark often gets sidelined or downplayed. A perfect example is the ranking of Aaliyah Boston. While ESPN placed her among the top players, fan votes didn't reflect the same sentiment. Boston's ranking in the All-Star voting as the 9th best forward, despite solid performances, seemed to be influenced by biased opinions from certain media members. These superfans and influencers who wield significant power have created an environment where subjective opinions hold more weight than player performance and statistics. The result is an unfair narrative that doesn't always align with what the public sees on the court. This situation highlights a larger issue, a divide between media and fan opinions. The media's influence on rankings and perceptions has created a scenario where players like Clark, too, are essential to the league's success, aren't always getting the recognition they deserve. Instead, players who fit the media's preferred narrative, or whose stories are more marketable, are often given more attention. Regardless of their actual performance, the bottom line is that the media double standard isn't just a minor issue, it's one that affects how players are valued, ranked, and recognized in the WNBA, when the media pushes certain narratives over others. It not only distorts the reality for fans, but also undermines the fairness and credibility of the system. In a league that is fighting for visibility and respect, this kind of bias could have long-lasting effects on the league's growth and reputation. The stakes for the WNBA have never been higher. With player salaries on the rise and increasing investments in the league, the financial landscape is shifting dramatically. However, the league faces a critical issue: officiating that fails to protect its top players, like Caitlin Clark, as the league's stars begin to command multi-million-dollar contracts. The WNBA must consider a vital question: how long can it afford to allow its stars to play in a system that doesn't protect them from physical abuse on the court? Caitlin Clark, with her high-profile status and endorsement deals, is no longer just a player, she's an investment. Owners and sponsors are looking at her and other top players as valuable assets, and a key part of the WNBA's financial future. But if these players continue to face aggressive, uncalled fouls without any consequences, the risk of injury increases, potentially sidelining players for weeks or months. Injuries can derail seasons and careers, but they can also significantly damage the league's brand. The WNBA is already fighting for legitimacy and visibility in a crowded sports market. A key selling point for the league is its stars. Without players like Clark performing at their best, the league risks losing momentum. In its fight for national attention and media coverage, the league's growing financial investments must be protected. And that starts with ensuring that the stars are able to perform without being physically compromised. If referees continue to turn a blind eye to fouls and injuries, the WNBA could see its future stars sidelined and its investments lost. It's clear that the WNBA's long-term success depends on fixing its officiating issues, or risk watching its brightest players and its financial potential fizzle out. Rebacca Lobo's bold and passionate call-out of the WNBA's officiating during the Indiana Fever vs. Dallas Wings game has ignited a firestorm of debate. For the first time in years, someone inside the leagues, someone with Lobo's credibility and experience, has gone on the record to address a growing issue that's been quietly simmering under the surface for far too long. But the real question now is, what happens next? Lobo's impassioned defense of Caitlin Clark and her criticism of the referees wasn't just a one-off moment. It was a warning shot to the league and to the fans that the time for silence is over. By calling out the blatant fouls and the lack of accountability, Lobo has forced the WNBA into a corner. The question is no longer whether these officiating issues exist there, undeniable. The question now is whether the league is willing to confront the reality that its refereeing system is broken. Lobo's words have been heard loud and clear. But will the WNBA listen? The league has a choice. It can continue down the path of ignoring the concerns of players, coaches, and commentators, or it can take this moment to reset and make changes that ensure the safety and fairness of the game. However, this isn't something that can be swept under the rug any longer. The stakes are too high, especially with the rising profile of stars like Caitlin Clark and the financial investments in the league. If the WNBA wants to position itself as a premier basketball league, it can't afford to let its stars get injured or disrespected by poor officiating. Lobo's outburst is also an opportunity for the media to reflect on its role in this situation. While commentators like Lobo have been outspoken, many other figures in the basketball world have kept quiet, possibly out of fear of backlash or alienating powerful forces within the league. But this moment could mark a turning point in how the media covers officiating. Lobo has set a precedent that others can follow. If more insiders, players, and commentators begin speaking out, the public pressure could push the WNBA to make real, tangible changes. Moreover, this could also signal a shift in how fans view the WNBA's commitment to fairness. Fans are increasingly savvy, and they can see through the inconsistencies in the league. They're not just passive viewers, they're engaged, passionate supporters who demand more from the product they're watching. When fans see stars like Caitlin Clark being treated unfairly, it creates a sense of frustration and disappointment. Lobo's bold words have tapped into that growing frustration. And now, the fans are watching closely, waiting for action. So, what's next? The WNBA must now confront its officiating problem head-on. If it doesn't, it risks losing the trust of both its players and its fans. Lobo has given them an opportunity to fix things. The question is whether the league will seize it or continue to ignore the problem, hoping it will go away. But the real danger lies in the league underestimating the power of the voices now speaking out. The time for change is here, and the WNBA's future may depend on whether it listens. Rebacca Lobo's courageous outburst has done what few others in the WNBA have dared to do: shine a spotlight on the glaring issues with officiating that have plagued the league for far too long. Her call for accountability wasn't just a moment. A frustration, it was a wake-up call for both the WNBA and its fans. The treatment of Caitlin Clark, along with countless other players, has shown that the league's officiating system isn't just flawed, it's dangerously negligent. The stakes are too high for this issue to be ignored any longer, as the future of the league and its stars hang in the balance. With the rising salaries and growing investments in the WNBA, it's crucial that the league addresses these officiating failures before it loses its credibility and its top talent. The time has come for the WNBA to protect its players, ensure fairness, and raise the standard of its officiating. The silence is no longer an option. Now, it's up to the league to respond, not just to the words of Rebacca Lobo, but to the growing voices of fans, players, and commentators who are demanding a safer, more just game. Will the WNBA act, or will it continue to let its stars take the hits? The ball is in their court.